Hey, everybody. So, I wanted to share with you today. Thanks for tuning in with me. Um, I was reading this book. It's a book about Frederick Douglass. Has a lot of his writings in it, a lot of letters that he wrote. It has, the book about his escaping slavery in there. All his like collected works. So, one of the writings that he had was called "The Nature of Slavery." So, I want to talk about just some of the key points that I underline from that writing that he had. So this is the nature of slavery. So he starts off, Frederick Douglass talks about 20 years he spent of his life in slavery. So he talks about the word master. And he says, what is a master? He says a master is a person who owns other humans as property. And he says back then, the law and religion is what they used to keep this ownership or create this ownership. It backed it up. The master was allowed to work the person. They were allowed to flog the person. They were allowed to hire the person out to make them money. They were allowed to sell the people, the families, the slaves. And in some cases, they were allowed to justifiably kill the person. So what is a slave, he says? He says a slave is a person, a human being that is divested of all of their rights. He says that this is by law. He says that they're in-laws, they have no wife, they have no children, they have no country, they have no home. So the slave owner might have let them get married, but really the wife could be sold away anytime the slave owner wanted. The children could be sold away. So they really didn't belong, even though they produced the children. The children didn't belong to the slave mother and father. They belonged to the slave master. He talked about the whip. It was the supreme method of control. When a slave was too sad, showing like he was upset or sad, they whipped him. When a slave was too happy, they whipped him. Slave wasn't working hard enough, they whipped him. Slave stayed away from the house too long, they whipped him. Slave was found in a part of the plantation they weren't supposed to be in, they whipped him. Slave owner asked for your daughter to come to his quarters that night. She was 12 or 13 years old, and you denied, you didn't send her. He whipped you for that severely. He talks about slavery. He says it was physically abusive, but he said the mental torture was worse than the physical. What it did mentally to generations and generations of people was worse than the physical. He believed. He said it destroyed all morality. It destroyed the family. It destroyed all religious responsibility. It just totally destroyed the people that were the slaves. It made them into like machines, he said, like robots, like just programmable, do this and this is what you're going to do, or face punishment or whatever. He says one of the biggest things about slavery is that the slave owners fought to keep slaves from being educated. He says that if slaves were educated, a lot of slave owners believe that that a slave was a wasted slave if he was educated. It would be hard to manage them. So for 200 years, slaves weren't allowed to be educated. So just think about what that did to the slaves, to the black race, not being able to be educated for 200 years. He talked about Irish versus black slaves. He said a lot of people bring that up about the Irish. He said, but really the Irish people weren't slaves. Even though they were treated, he does agree that they were treated very bad, they still could come and go as they pleased. And they weren't actually slaves, even though they were treated really horribly. And he did say that. He ended the chapter by saying that he believed that, if a country did something this bad to people for a long time like that, that one day the country's going to have to pay the price for that, like karma, he said. He says, I'm not wishing any bad luck on it, but he says, how can the country hope not to have to pay the price for what they did to the slaves? So, like I said, this was from Frederick Douglass's book with a lot of different writings in it. This was Frederick Douglass's words on the nature of slavery. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and message if you get a chance. Peace.